This episode of Harvey Brownstone Interviews is brought to you by the Harvey Brownstone Talk Show Blend Coffee, available at hollywoodblends.com. Everyone's saying it's the best coffee they've ever tasted. Why not give it a try and see for yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone, and if you're a fan of our show, you'll be familiar with our very special series called Gone But Not Forgotten, where we celebrate the careers and legacies of the greatest cinematic legends of all time. Today's guest is the daughter of one of the most popular, beloved, and highly acclaimed actors of the 20th century, John Garfield. He received Academy Award nominations and New York Film Critics Circle Award nominations for his performances in Body and Soul and Four Daughters, for which he also won a National Board of Review award. His other iconic movies include They Made Me a Criminal, Juarez, Daughters Courageous, The Sea Wolf, Pride of the Marines, The Postman Always Rings Twice, Humoresque, Gentleman's Agreement, Force of Evil, The Breaking Point, and many more. He also appeared in over a dozen Broadway shows, including Golden Boy, The Big Knife, Counselor at Law, Peer Gynt, and many more. In the early 50s, during the McCarthy era, John Garfield was victimized and blacklisted because he adamantly refused to name names when he testified before the House Un-American Activities Committee. Tragically, he passed away of a heart attack in 1952 at the age of 39, largely brought on by the stress of the persecution he faced as a blacklisted actor. Our guest is Mr. Garfield's only living child, Julie Garfield. She's had a most impressive career as an award-winning actress in the theater, both on and off Broadway and in film and television. And for the past 20 years, she has been focusing exclusively on her career as a prominent artist. Her paintings and drawings have been featured in many prestigious galleries and exhibits, especially in New York City. I am delighted to welcome Miss Julie Garfield to our show. Julie, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for asking me to come.
Now, Julie, your father passed away when you were only 6 years old. What are your memories of your dad?
What are my memories of my dad? I don't have a lot of them, but here's my favorite. He took me to the carousel, and we have a carousel in Central Park, and I loved that. Also, he took me to the boating in the Central Park West boat in the lake there. He had an incredible smile. I remember that. And by the way, the carousel, the guy at the carousel, he loved my father. So I was allowed to be on the carousel as many times as I wanted to because my father was famous. So that was a big deal for me. My father was funny and a lot of fun and very exuberant. And he called me a character. A character is something we call somebody you play in a play or a movie, a character. But when he was saying it, he was basically picking up on my insane personality, which I even had when I was little like that. I was very wild and probably very funny because I've always been kind of wild and funny my whole life. So he called me the character. You know, I wish I had more memories of my father. I remember very clearly going backstage to see him in plays. I remember very clearly seeing him do the revival of Golden Boy and being late for the theater with my mother and being on an escalator and her wishing that the escalator would go faster so we could get there on time. And then we got there, but the curtain had already gone up and all the people are like sitting all around and we have to move past them and we have shopping bags and they're very annoyed with us. They're like furious at us because we're bothering them. And then we finally get our seats. Of course, we had great seats. And then at the end of the play, when he did his curtain calls, he did the special curtain call for me. And then, of course, I was very proud because I was embarrassed, because I had been late to the show. But then everybody looked at me and they smiled at me. And all those people who were so annoyed with me weren't annoyed with me anymore. because they realized that I was John Garfield's daughter, and they all applauded. And, it was a great moment. This is very sad because my moments with my father were so few. He took me into the ocean on his shoulders. I think that's the only time I was not afraid of going into the ocean. Later on, I became always afraid of going into the ocean. And, he had a booming voice. So I think when they were fighting my mother and they were fighting about what his stand should be when he was being blacklisted, I think that I could hear that voice. And there was a lot of fighting going on, and that was pretty awful.
Julie, when you lose a parent so young, how do you go about learning who he really was?
Well, we were very fortunate that my mother had a friend who was a producer, Lopair. He actually produced The Red Shoes and some other really great movies. And he gave us a projector. So we used to show my father's movies at home all the time. And I was always very sad when the movie was over. It always ended up with me in tears and me missing my father and wanting him to come back. It was a huge, sad hole in my life. And even though I was only 6.5, it left a very strong imprint on my life. And unfortunately, I began to have these horrible nightmares. And I had a lot of problems with having nightmares. And it was a very difficult time. My brother was a disturbed boy. He had problems. And I think it just was very strange at his funeral because so many people came. My mother was Jewish, and you don't open the coffin when you're Jewish. But because there were 10,000 people outside wanting to say their last respects to him, the police came in and they warned my mother about it. They said, there's going to be a riot if you don't let them in. They're just going to push their way in. You need to uncover the casket and let them see him. And so she did. And then I saw him too. So as you can imagine, it was a very traumatic time. I actually had a date with him on the day that he died because he was separated from my mother. They were fighting over the stand he was going to take at the House Un-American Activities Committee. And my mother said, don't apologize to them. Don't explain anything to them. Let's just go. We'll get out of here. We'll go to London. You'll work there. We'll go to Mexico, or we'll go to Paris. You'll work there. Let's get out of here, And that was her argument with him. He didn't agree. He wanted to stay and work as an actor. So that became a huge problem in their marriage, and they separated. That's the sad story.
You mentioned that your mom was Jewish. Your father's birth name was Jacob Julius Garfinkel. He was Jewish too. Do you think when he changed his name to John Garfield for obvious reasons as a stage name, did he retain his Jewishness?
Oh, absolutely, yes. But my father, he wasn't, my parents were Jews, but I would say that their Jewishness also lay in their hope for unions, labor unions, their hope for the worker to have a chance, their interest in the writings of Karl Marx and those ideas. So they were not, avidly, strictly practicing Jews. I think their Jewishness was more cultural.
Now, you're the only living child of John Garfield. You had a brother, David, who you mentioned, who passed away in 1994. You had a sister, Catherine, who died of an allergic reaction at a picnic at the age of 6, the year before you were born. So you never knew her. Your birth must have been an exceptionally welcome and joyful event after the tragedy your parents went through, don't you think?
Was it a joyful event? I hope so. I mean, I really hope so. My sister's death, by the way, I don't know where you heard the part about a picnic. My mother had sent my sister away. My brother was a a little boy. He was about 6 months old. He was just a baby. I think they were throwing a party. And what happened is that my sister had an asthmatic reaction. And my father's secretary, instead of bringing her to the hospital, she drove her home. And by the time she got home, my sister, she was not breathing. She had had an anaphylactic shock reaction, and she died on the living room floor. And all the people were there, and my brother was up in his cradle. And so I would imagine it left quite an impression on his subconscious. And my father flipped out, really flipped out, and he went outside and he had a round of blanks that he fired into the back of the swimming pool. I mean, he really freaked. And she died in my mother's arms. And my mother never got over it. And she hid it from me for a long time. And I found out later. And it was just a huge tragedy. And I think that maybe the reason they had me was a way of trying to, make up their marriage, which was very tempestuous and had problems in it. And also to heal themselves and have another child. As a result of that, I was very protected and overly protected. And I think that resulted in me being afraid a lot, being afraid of what happened to my father, being afraid what happened to my sister, being afraid of fame also.
It's just such a tragedy. Now, I understand, Julie, if I have this correctly, many years after your father passed away, someone sent you his wallet. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. That was pretty wild. We did a documentary called the John Garfield story. I did that with Joan Kramer and David Healy. They've done a lot of great documentaries. They did a documentary about Katharine Hepburn. They've won all kinds of awards. So we did this show about my father, and I narrated it. And one day I get this phone call, and hi, this is Mr. Blum's secretary. Mr. Blum has a gift he wants to give you that belonged to your father. And I said, what? Anyway, he wants to meet you at this restaurant. And I'm like, okay, well, he gets on the phone and I speak to him. And he said, listen, I found something that belonged to your father, and I saved it for all of these years, hoping that one day I would find you or your brother and I'd be able to give it to you. Well, it turned out that we met for dinner and he gave me my father's wallet. And it was unbelievable. There was my father's wallet, had his name embossed in gold on the cover. And inside, all these pictures of me and the Screen Actors Guild membership and Actors Equity membership and pictures of my brother. And I mean, it was like, a sight into the past. And it was just extraordinary. It was like he was there with me in that wallet.
That's just a miracle.
Yeah.
Now, Julie, I want to ask you, when and how did you begin to really appreciate your father's talent as an actor?
Oh my God, for all of my life. I mean, we watched the movies all the time. But of course, after I studied with all the people I studied with Sandy Meisner, I studied with Stella Adler briefly. We didn't get along too well. I studied with Larry Moss for a while, Warren Robertson. Then I studied with Lee. I studied with this great teacher, Marilyn Freed, and I became a great actress, actually. And I, of course, understood it then. But really, the thing that what my father did that no one had ever done before, ever, was to bring an internal life into the character. And before that, acting was very declamatory. It was very on the surface. And so my father was the one who really broke through that. And he's not given enough credit for it. I do think part of that is because Marlon Brando did Streetcar on stage, and my father turned that part down. And if he had just only done that play, I think he would have had a little bit more credit for it. But my father basically broke through that way of acting into this more internalized way of acting.
So, would you consider your father to have been a method actor? Because he was the inspiration for many method actors like Marlon Brando, Montgomery Clift, James Dean, just to name a few.
Oh, absolutely. He was a method actor. But he was a method actor in the sense, but he was not a self-indulgent. A lot of people think of method acting now as self-indulgence. It's not self-indulgence at all. There are some people who have been very self-indulgent with it or misunderstood it and mistaught it. They're misteaching it right now at New York University. I just heard about that. They just don't understand. Method acting is a tool. It's one of the tools. And in that tool, you use the deepest part of yourself and your past and your senses, your senses are such powerful ways to access your emotions and your feelings. And so that's what method acting was about. But people didn't understand that method acting was not just about that. It was also about understanding literature, understanding context, understanding what was happening within a scene or in a play, what was happening sociologically in that world. I mean, as an actor, you have to understand all those things. And I think that it was just because my father brought that visceral, emotional truth to his work that made him especially a method actor who broke through acting.
I know that he inspired you to become an actress. And what you've just described about his technique, would you say that was the most important thing you learned from your dad as an actress?
I think I happen to be very fortunate that I studied with all these great teachers, and I had my own incredible instincts about acting. I was just sort of, born into me. And then when I watched my father, I could see all that stuff going on. And yes, I think it had a huge influence on me. And and but all my teachers had a huge influence on me. And you know, it's not just one thing that makes you understand what acting is about because it's so multifaceted. And if my father had lived a little longer, he would have had more of a chance to utilize that in other ways because he was very funny. And people don't think of him as a funny actor. He actually did this movie Saturday's Children. It was not a hit movie, but he plays this young Jewish man who's in love, and he's sort of bumbling all over himself. He's like a bumbling fool, very lovable, very handsome, but a fool. And since the movie was a success, not a lot of people saw that performance, but they saw, you see in him that ability to change himself, and that's what great actors do. So yes, he influenced me, but a lot of other people influenced me too.
So, Julie, when you were pursuing your career as an actress, did you feel a certain pressure in terms of people's expectations because you were John Garfield's daughter?
Terrible. Yeah, I just couldn't. Actually, what happened to me is that I did this play off Broadway. I did Uncle Vanya off Broadway, and all of a sudden, I got these rave reviews and love letters in the New York Post, in the New York Times, everywhere, and all these famous people started coming to see me, producers and directors. And this event was happening down on 26th Street in this old roundabout theater, which was this old theater in a basement. And when this suddenly started happening to me, it really frightened me. And it frightened me so much that I ran away for a while. So I don't think that I was psychologically cut out to handle fame. You have to be a certain kind of person to handle that kind of thing. I just wasn't good at it at all.
Now, your father was one of the stars at Warner Brothers who received the most suspensions because he insisted on good scripts, good parts, good directors. He was suspended 11 times during his 9 years at the studio. Why do you think it took the studio executives so long to realize just how special he was?
Well, they were idiots, the studio executives, and they just wanted him to do the same thing over and over again because that was making them money. It's like, let's just sell the same car, same color, same everything over and over and not change it. So he didn't want that. He wanted to grow as an actor and he wanted to do different things. And that was unheard of. So he started his own, once his contract with Warner Brothers was up, he started his own film production company with a group of people. And they produced the best films that he ever made, one which was Force of Evil, and the other one was Body and Soul. But he had to get away from the studios because the studios just wanted to continue to make him do the same thing over and over. And when he said, "I'm not doing that again," they would put him on suspension. That, by the way, is another reason why he was blacklisted, because they were after him because he was a Jew, because he didn't want to, obey the studio's demands, because he started his own production company. So they actually picked him and said, "Let's go." They wanted one person to go after who was famous, who they could just rip apart, and they picked him to do that with, and they destroyed his career.
Well, he was very much ahead of his time to create his own production company. So when you watch your father's movies today, Julie, what goes through your mind?
I watched, I love to watch the way he worked internally and filled everything so specifically with what he was doing. You could see it in his eyes, his humor. And also, I felt sorry for him sometimes because I would see some of this terrible films he was in, and I just thought, "Oh God, this is so bad. This film is so bad. I just feel so bad that he has to be doing this crap." I mean, I felt awful about it. Like I just watched one the other day with Geraldine Fitzgerald, and they were both great in it, but it was such a stupid movie. It was really dumb. But then when it was good enough to be a great film like Body and Soul or Force of Evil or Breaking Point, which are the three best, plus he ran all the way. But you asked me what did I see? I watch everything, everything that he does, and everything is truth with him, and his physicality and the choices he's made about what he's going to be wearing and how he's physically going to be, and it's just utterly fascinating and truthful.
Oh, absolutely. You mentioned what you consider to be his three best films. I have to say my favorite John Garfield films are They Made Me a Criminal, The Postman Always Rings Twice, Humoresque, and Pride of the Marines. I loved him in all those.
Oh, well, he was great in Pride of the Marines. He really was extraordinary in that movie. I mean, he played blind like that was, do you know how hard it is to play someone blind? It is so difficult. He was so amazing in that movie. He should have won an Academy Award for that. And I loved, and he had a great time on Humoresque. Do you know how hard it was for him to make that movie when those violin scenes? He actually had to act with from here up. That was it. He would have his shin on the violin and they would shoot him. And then there's this guy standing behind him, holding the violin and playing so he's only acting with his head and his face, and with the music. It's an extraordinary feat what he did. Yeah, that's a great one too. They became very close friends. He and Isaac Stern did the music for that and gave him lessons. They became very close friends. Yeah, he loved it.
It's a wonderful movie. Now, because your father had a heart condition brought on by scarlet fever, he wasn't able to enlist in the army during World War II, but he did a lot to support the war effort. He sold war bonds, he went overseas to entertain the troops, and he made a number of important war movies. And of course, he was instrumental, together with Bette Davis, in creating the Hollywood Canteen, which was a nightclub that entertained the soldiers. You must be so proud of him, Julie.
Oh my God, my father was a hero. He was a real hero. My father was the first actor who went overseas to entertain the troops. And he actually almost got killed there. That was before Bob Hope. Bob Hope got all the credit for it, but Daddy did it first. Of course, I am very proud of my father. I just, I paint him a lot. I've sold 4 paintings of him now, and I've got this, a thing going on right now and hoping to sell some paintings of him. But I like to paint him. He had such a gorgeous face,
You painted the portrait that we see behind you, right?
I painted that, yes.
It's gorgeous. Now, in July 2017, Julie, you wrote a very powerful op-ed in the New York Times about the Blacklist and your father. Tell me about what your father went through.
Oh, they followed us everywhere. The FBI kept tabs on us. They followed us wherever he went, he was followed. Wherever we went, we were followed. I always see these strange men in raincoats and hats, and around the house, around the apartment building. It's like, what are they doing here? My mother would say they're FBI, and it was. I didn't understand. I really didn't understand, but I knew something was up because my parents were fighting about it and how he should handle it. And when my father died, about a week after he died, you're not going to believe this story. The doorbell rings, and my mother goes to the door, and it's the FBI there. And she said, "What are you doing here?" And they said, "We just want to take a little look around." And she said, "He's dead. You got what you wanted. Now get the fuck out of here." That's what she said. I mean, she used to swear she had a mouth like a sailor. And so she just kicked them out. But they were taunting my father. They were following him everywhere. They were harassing him, and they were trying to get him to name names. And my father grew up in the streets, in the code of the streets. You don't name names. You don't do that. There are people who have done that who never got mentioned. For some reason, they got away with it. Kazan had a great career and made a movie about being a stool pigeon. And in his movie, the stool pigeon is a great hero. That's in the movie with Marlon, on the waterfront. It was, my father just refused to do that. And to me, he was a great hero. And to my mother, he was a great hero also.
Your father made Force of Evil with Abraham Polanski, who was one of the most prominent victims of the Hollywood Blacklist.
Correct.
Can you tell me about his relationship with Polanski?
Oh, they loved each other. And here's a great story, by the way. My father, he wanted to do the film, and it was his production company. He picked that script. And then all of a sudden he said, "I don't know, how am I going to play a lawyer? I come from the streets. I've never had an education like that. I don't know how I'm going to do it. Maybe you should get another actor to play the part. Maybe I can't do this part." And I think it was Abe Polanski. He just kept insisting that he do the part. And then my father did the thing that the actor does. This is what the actor does. He goes to a pawn shop and gets himself a Phi Beta Kappa key. That's what you get when you get the Phi Beta Kappa, the highest educational award. And so he bought himself one. And if you see the movie, you'll see that he wears a vest, and there's the key hanging down like this. And that was the key to his character, wearing the key.
Brilliant. Shortly before his death, your father wrote an article called "I Was a Sucker for a Left Hook," which was an attempt to get himself off of the blacklist. What did you think of that article?
Well, my mother didn't think he wrote that article, and she was furious about it. And what did I think about it? I don't think there was anything wrong with it. I just think he was explaining that he was an American, very patriotic man, a Democrat, and he just tried to explain who he was and what he was. And my mother felt that by writing that article, he was caving. He was like kowtowing to them. She felt that he should just, walk away from it and not try to justify his beliefs in this country. But my father was such a patriot. I mean, he so loved this country. Oh my God. If he knew what was going on right now in this country, he would be horrified, really horrified about it.
I have no doubt. You mentioned your father's funeral. It was attended by over 10,000 people, one of the biggest crowds New York City had ever seen. Were you at that funeral, Julie?
Yes, I was at the funeral, yeah. And they ended up opening the coffin, and I saw him in the coffin. And all of this huge amount of people, and this terrible thing. It was, I was 6.5 years old. I was so confused by what happened. I was so imprinted by it. So never.
It's traumatizing.
Terrible. I had terrible nightmares. All my childhood, I had to start going to see a therapist almost a year after because I had these horrible nightmares.
Well, my heart goes out to you because that really was traumatizing. Now, you mentioned Joan Kramer and David Healy, who were on our show. They produced this fabulous documentary about your dad in 2003 called The John Garfield Story, which you narrated. Is it true that you were the one who called PBS and suggested that they make a documentary?
Oh, me? Oh, I don't think it was me. I think it was Joan and David.
Well, they say it was you.
They say it was me.
Yeah.
I wouldn't give myself credit for that. I give the credit to Joan and David for that. Those two people are so incredible. I wouldn't imagine I'd be the kind of person that would have the chutzpah to call PBS. Well, I have a lot of chutzpah, it's true, but that's very sweet that they say I did that. Maybe I did something. I don't know. Whichever way it was, it wouldn't have happened without Joan and David. That's for sure. I mean, it was some lucky thing from the gods that put us together. I don't even remember how it happened. And if I did that, then bravo for me.
Well, that's what I want to say. Bravo to you. Tell me, was narrating the documentary a very emotional experience for you?
Oh, totally. Yeah. But, David, well, I get chills when I think about that experience because David was basically David Healy. He was in the room with me. And I had never narrated anything before. And of course, I had practice and everything. And I'm married to a man who made his living with his voice. So of course, he helped me a lot. He coached me and he said, "You can do this. I mean, it's just like telling a story. That's all." And David was there, and Joan was there. You can't have two more loving, understanding people, kind people to help you do something like that, And so it became an extraordinary event. And I felt like, wow, I did that and I was really good. I could do this again, Too bad I didn't know about it sooner. But I would definitely say that they're very much responsible. And whether I went, I don't know the answer to that. If I went to PBS, I don't know. Maybe I did.
Well, for any of our viewers who have not seen the documentary, The John Garfield Story, it can be seen as a bonus feature on the DVD of The Postman Always Rings Twice. Now, Julie, is it true that another documentary about your dad is in the works?
Yes, there's a documentary that I don't know if I'm allowed to name names here. A very famous guy is working on, and you all know him. Oh, God, I can't do this. But I really hope that it comes out. It's about Daddy and Abe Polonsky. But I think he might kill me if I mention it. I mean, should I mention it?
I think you can, although if you prefer, I will mention it. My understanding through the grapevine is that it will be produced by Eddie Muller.
Yes! How did you know that?
Because I did my research.
Oh my God. So it's out there? It's out there in the ether?
Yes.
I didn't know that. Wow. Okay. Yes. I mean, yes, that was actually the best interview I ever did in my life. I think that by the time I finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the rooms. There were several rooms and everybody was crying. Everybody. And I was very proud of my interview. So yes. So you know about it, huh? Okay. He's been working on it for a couple of years now. And I can't wait until it's done. And I'm very excited about it. Yeah.
There have been several books written about your father over the years, and I want to ask you about each of them, starting with He Ran All the Way, The Life of John Garfield by Robert Knott. What did you think of that book?
I wasn't happy with the book. I felt it was too factual and it wasn't emotional enough.
There's another book called Body and Soul, The Story of John Garfield by Larry Swindell. What did you think of that book?
It's okay.
And finally, there's a book called The Films of John Garfield by James Nebar. Do you have an opinion about that book?
It's good.
Do you think you'll ever write a book about your dad?
I have a book. It would be about me more than about my dad. But I never finished it because it was awfully hard for me to do it. And I stopped. I might continue it. I don't know. But it won't be about my dad. It'll be about us. all of us.
I hope you do it. I hope you really do. Now, as I mentioned in my introduction, you're a very gifted and highly acclaimed artist. And when I went to your website, I saw that you've painted so many portraits of your dad. When you create an image of him, does that process bring you closer to him on a spiritual level?
Yes, it does. I like doing it because he's there in front of me and because I feel so much about him. And I love to, I have so much love for him. So it's very nice experience to paint my father. It's like being with him.
How do you think your dad would want to be remembered?
Oh my God, as a great actor and the man who broke through into the true acting, and as the kindest person in the world, and as who always did things for people in need, who was a violent, anti-racist, and who acted on that. A man with great integrity, kind to a fault.
Well, Julie, although your father was taken from you so young and you never really got to know him as you were growing up, I really hope it brings you some comfort and consolation to know that your dad is still so beloved and respected and admired. His movies will keep him alive forever.
Oh, well, thank you very much. Who I would love to make a movie about my father is George Clooney. If anybody could do it, not for him to play my father, but did you see the Edward R. Murrow movie he made?
Yes, that was called Good Night and Good Luck.
Good Luck. Well, now he's doing it on Broadway, right? Well, if I could just get to George Clooney, I think he could make a movie about John Garfield. No one's ever been able to make a good movie about the Blacklist and how it impacted the people like my father. And I believe he would be the one that could do that. So, George, if you see this interview, please help me make a movie about John Garfield. It's a great love story also, by the way.
I think that when the Eddie Muller documentary comes out, there's going to be renewed interest in his life, and you might find that a movie will be made.
From your mouth to God's ear.
Well, Julie, it's been such a pleasure meeting you and having this opportunity to celebrate the life and career of your dear father. Thank you for everything you've been doing to honor and perpetuate the legacy of John Garfield. And thank you so much for taking the time to appear on our show.
Oh, thank you. You're very sweet.
Our guest has been the renowned artist and daughter of the legendary John Garfield, Miss Julie Garfield. You can learn more about Miss Garfield and see her beautiful artistry by going to her official website, juliegarfield.com. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time. Thank you to my producer, Steve Silver, my managers, Rick Marcelli and Robin Bragg Marcelli at the Marcelli Company in Hollywood, my director of programming, Robert Monaghan, my PR directors, Eileen Shapiro and Jimmy Starr, and my entire team at the XPTV1 network in the UK.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out all the great interviews on the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when new videos are posted.